Okay, once again, good afternoon. My name's Mark Turner from the Supply Chain Sustainability School. We're here to deliver a very short, just 45 minutes tops, introduction to the circular economy. We call these our lunch and learn sessions. So they're mostly me talking, unfortunately for you. That's me. I lead on the facilities management sector for the school. And I also look after the group of school partners, which is investigating waste and resource use. That's a very busy and active group in the school. I can assure you that there's a lot of interest in that group, and significantly a lot of interest around the circular economy and getting wider and broader understanding of the circular economy and the basics of it. And that's exactly where I'm going to be focusing today. This will be a very kind of basic level whistle-stop tour through with some examples. The idea is that we go away with these kinds of things. So in this, I'm hoping that by the end of it, you'll certainly have an understanding of the circular economy, what it is, and the drivers that influence it, and then to be able to consider opportunities to introduce more circular ways of working in your own organizations, but also on behalf of your clients, because it's we are a supply chain sustainability school, and we're getting a lot of kind of client requests in this area. We want our clients very, very keen to see the supply chain stepping up with ideas and solutions and innovation that can make things happen in this area. The last point is just to be able to explain the challenges and opportunities to any colleagues, any customers and supply chain, because it's one thing understanding these things yourselves. You'll be able to explain what the circular economy is to others, and that is a useful thing because it does happen under fire, and sometimes you're not prepared for that. So if you can get the principles right, that's a very good place from which to start. I mentioned before our waste and resource use group within the school, and this group runs all the way across from the client through the designer, through subcontractors and many of the prime contractors who are involved and suppliers. It involves also the facilities management side of the operation of the existing built environment, and also the all-important kind of demolition, deconstruction and demobilization side of things as well. But what you'll see at the bottom, in terms of that kind of diagram that we put there, is the key principle is we're looking for a continuous link to the circular economy throughout there. Now, it goes without saying that if you can start right the way at the design end and the kind of the client vision and the design end, you will definitely get the best possible results. But there are many opportunities to influence the first circular economy, and they come all the way through that kind of lifespan of the built environment. Okay, just moving on. So a really fundamental and basic question. So what is waste and who's interested in waste? And here's the definition of waste, which I've pulled from the EU. Remember the EU, everybody? The EU Waste Framework Directive. And that says any substance or object that the holder discards or intends to or is required to discard. Now, why that's interesting, I think, is it throws up the word discard, which does not feel, even at this early stage in this discussion, like the kind of route you want to be going down with a circular economy. So let's move on, because what we need to then say is, are we actually talking about waste? Are we talking about resources? Is waste just the resources in the wrong place at the wrong time? And what can we do to change that situation? So moving on to a definition for a circular economy, and I feel this is a good definition. This was taken from WRAP, the Waste Resources Action Programme, and it says that a circular economy is an alternative to a traditional linear economy, and they use the phrase make, use, and then dispose. I'll explain that more in a second, in which we keep resources in use for as long as possible, then extract the maximum value from them while in use, and then recover and regenerate products and materials at the end of each service life. So service life is important as well, because that indicates that you're thinking about the stages of the lifetime of whatever that product is. So here it is in diagram form, and it becomes a little easier to see and explain in diagram form, because under a linear economy, what we would do, so this is how we've kind of done things for too long, is we either dig stuff out of the ground, we mine it or dig it out of the ground, or we grow it. We then design that into something that's then manufactured into something, and it's then consumed by us, the consumers, either individual consumers or corporate consumers. And then it goes to a disposal fate. And for too long, we've just been following that linear route, and hence we've been stacking up immense tons of waste, not making the best use of valuable, scarce resources, and not making the use of all the work and all the input and all the energy and all the cost that has gone into developing those products in the first place, into designing them to be how they are, into reshaping those materials, bringing those materials together to make those products. So if you drop down to the bottom half of the diagram, what a circular economy does, you'll see that you have the raw material inputs on the left-hand side. Then you go into this kind of key design phase. And I've got a good example later on, which kind of shows what you can do in terms of design. Then into a manufacturing phase, and then the consumption. But then you can see a maintenance cycle starting to kick in. So this is thinking about maintaining those products, maintaining that service in use. And that is obviously best done if you think about it early on. So you design things to be maintainable, and we will keep touching back on that topic. Then get into the concepts of reuse and refurbishment. So can you if you can maintain something for its intended use, but then when it goes beyond the lifetime of its intended use, can you actually reuse that product, or you reuse parts of that product, making the best use of the inputs that have gone to it already? And at the point when that is no longer possible, when that cycle's kind of finished, can you then recycle and recapture that material and put it back into the loop again? So there is a circular economy, fairly simply told. Okay, now here's a diagram from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. Now, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has done enormous amounts of work around circular economy and has really kind of led the line in many respects in some of the the real high-end thinking around the circular economy. So here's a more complex way of looking at the same issue. And what it shows in more detail is they split into biological nutrients on the left-hand side and technical nutrients on the right-hand side. So on the left-hand side, stuff you grow or farm or fish out of the sea. And on the right-hand side, stuff that you mine, effectively. So mines and quarries. And those raw materials drop down towards a parts manufacturer who forwards the parts to a product manufacturer who forwards the end product to a service provider of some kind, and then the end users and consumers. But what you will see is a series of feedback loops. They refer to them as cascades, but I quite like the phrase feedback loops. The principle that to think about here is that the tighter those feedback loops, the better result you're going to get in terms of sustainability, the more circular your approach is going to be. So if you design and build a product that is capable of being maintained, and being maintained for a long time and going through several kind of service lives under that maintenance schedule, it's going to be more sustainable. It's going to make better use of the resources. But that maintenance side will eventually move towards a kind of a reuse or redistribution side. There may be products or there may be elements of what you have that can't be used for the original intended use, but could be used for a different use. So can those components be reused elsewhere? And if they can't, can the whole thing be refurbished and remanufactured? Can you go into a recycling loop? So think about that kind of whole set of loops. Okay, right. I'm going to bring you right back to basics now. If you're as old as me, I'll be 60 this year. You may remember these reprobates who are on the screen in front of you, and you'll be asking yourself, what on earth have they got to do with circularity? Well, quite a lot, actually, because these comedy series were running 40 years ago, but 40 years ago, there were rag and bone men going around in a comedy context, making absolute use of everything they found. So nothing ever went to waste. Everything had a use. And you had a service, a circular service, which was something called a milk round, where a reusable container was used to bring something of use to everybody's doorstep. And back then it was pretty much everybody's doorstep on, believe it or not, an electric van. Can you believe it? Yeah. And as John has rightly pointed out, who could ever forget the Wombles? So I'm making, it's a comedy point, but the reality is that this is not all new thinking. Some of the the high-end conceptual stuff that we're starting to see now is most definitely new thinking, and some of the design for maintenance and reuse and future purposes that we don't even know about yet, that is definitely kind of reaching for the stars. But the basics of actually making better use of what we have is something that's been around for quite a long time. So I've put this slide together here just to say that if you could take one thing away from this kind of 3/4 of an hour this morning, it's circularity isn't just about recycling stuff when you don't want it anymore. It's about rethinking the problem in the round, and you start with, do you need it in the first place? The most sustainable purchase you can make is the purchase you don't make at all. So can you think a way around not actually requiring it at all? And that would relate not just to all of something, but maybe some of something. So you may relate that to the packaging packaging. Do you need all that packaging? Can you reduce some of that packaging? We will return to packaging, I promise you. Can you fix it? Can you fix it? Is it something that you can actually repair? Could you design it better so it can be fixed? There are two areas there. One is, can you design it better so it can be fixed? And can actually, within your busy working life and working schedule and the whole kind of world of working across the built environment, can we be bothered to go back and fix things and get into a mindset of thinking that we will go back and fix things and maintain them? Can you retain more value in the products that you buy, use and sell? Could somebody else use it if you don't need it any longer? That's another issue as well, rather than just skip it because the skip is there. And can you save time and money by doing this? Now that's a complex equation. That's not the simplest thing to work through, because you have to look at the whole thing in the round. But there is no doubt that we're moving in a more circular direction. So that equation will get a little bit easier to work through. We'll come back to the reuse of food waste in medieval times as well. Right, starting with Menti now. So we're going to do some stakeholder exercise. I've spoken about the circular economy, I've outlined it, but who has an interest in the circular economy? So if we bring up our first Menti poll, and I know not everybody likes these word clouds, but most people do. And I find them really useful because it gives me something to talk to. And what you can see is it's not a short list, it's a long list. So there are an enormous amount of individuals, organizations with an interest in the circular economy. And in the middle comes everyone, because it's in all our interests. But you see designers, clients, you see sustainability consultants, yes, definitely got an interest in the circular economy. You see communities mentioned there. Individuals, shareholders, very important that, because the investment community is beginning to look now at sustainability with a real kind of serious eye, because it demonstrates businesses, actual solid instances of sustainability in action, demonstrate businesses that are future-proofing themselves and thinking about the direction in which they wish to go and the direction that future society may go and demand. So the investment community is a really important one. But more and more we need to think about our local communities as well, and the local community can have a big say in the circular economy. So let's move to the next question. Thanks for that. That's a brilliant set of interest, and you'll get a copy of that so you can actually show that to others. Just if people say, well, nobody cares about this, show them that, and it'll, albeit we're all on this call because we've got one interest or another in sustainability. I think it really helps to kind of lead the discussion. So the next one is, of all those stakeholders, who's got the most influence? So and do clients always know what to ask for? Well, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, I would say. So sometimes we have to judiciously influence our clients and tell them something they didn't know. Then we're of more value to our client. Sometimes our client will lead and absolutely know what they want. We see government coming in there, and we'll come to that as well. Designers, yes. So again, it's a smaller list, but you can see it's a really good list in terms of who's asking the questions and who's got the influence and who's got the leverage to actually make something happen. And you would think with a list like that we'd be really making rapid progress in circularity. But actually, when you go out to look for examples, there are less really good polished examples than I would like to see. But I do work in sustainability, so maybe it's that's the way it is, and it's going to take a little longer to get there. But I feel this is starting to gather traction now. And the number of people we had booked on this call today indicates as much. Okay, thanks for that. It was really helpful. So that did just the job I wanted it to. So I'm going to do a bit more now. So just, you can type this up, but just think, oh no, actually we're going to do this on the Menti as well. So thinking about, we've just gone through probably the weirdest year ever in most of our lives, and thinking about the last year in your home life as well as your working environment, ask yourself the question, what's become more circular and what's become less circular, and where does it actually require a bit more thought than just that it's more or less? So we're going to look at some examples now. There we go. So everybody remember staring into the fridge at that moldy pepper and thinking, am I going to chuck it or am I going to use it? Let alone the great toilet roll famine of March last year. I think we can kind of go back and say that we had to become more circular in the way in which we operated around just our weekly shop, because we would buy what was available and we would use what was available and we would make use of it. And I took the time to smash up the old deck in my back garden and turn it into a compost heap. And I got 10 bags of compost out of that a month ago. So that saved me about, I don't know, 80 quid, something like that. And, I enjoyed doing it. But the point being that actually turning stuff into that loop, if we think about the left-hand side of Ellen MacArthur's model, makes it quite interesting that, we could be much, much more efficient in our use of food. So, so if we move on to the next question. So what we can see there is most people think it's more circular, a few think it's less, and a few think it requires a bit more thought in terms of how we address the whole food issue. Now, here's a sticky one, because PPE, we've all seen it, haven't we? We've seen the demand, we've seen the spurious demand, we've seen the absolutely critical demand, we've seen the unfulfilled demand, we've seen the waste. Really interesting. So nobody's saying it's more circular, but quite a few are saying it needs more thought. And I think that's right, because what we've seen as the years progress, I mentioned before that I work in the facilities management sector. And what I found was that, they were obviously massively under pressure in terms of their supply chain to bring in the relevant PPE for client site, so that such business as was going on and such activities as were going on could continue to do so safely and effectively. But that meant a lot of single use and also meant a lot of packaging. But what has happened even through the year is we've started to see some redevelopment. So we're starting to see some elements of PPE that are actually reusable in themselves, which is, so face masks where you can kind of, replace part of the component and so on and so forth. And we're starting to see a better attitude towards disposal. So that rethinking the kind of, when I say the disposal route, the recycling route in effect. And clearly safety comes first. But there's more work to be done on PPE, because we're probably going to be with this problem for quite a bit longer. There's going to be a lot more PPE. Reusable masks that are washable, but you don't see enough of them. Good point. Fast food outlets using cardboard in food containers. Good example. Let's move to the next one. Has anybody tried to buy a bike in the last year? Has anybody tried to get their bike repaired at a bike shop in the last year? Quite a challenge. I think we've become better at more effective reuse. Yeah, and needs more thoughts really, but how we do things. So, but do we design products for maintenance? So we're probably trying to maintain products that weren't designed for maintenance in some instances. Okie doke. Yeah, guidance to what to do with waste has been unclear, and I think it has on occasion been unclear. Thanks for that one. Final one. Now, you've all had a package or two this last year. I've even had them while I've been running these calls. So what do we think? Yeah, I'm not surprised the bulk is coming out. Well, actually, it's changing there now. Probably the majority in terms of that this is a less circular approach. But is it entirely a less circular approach? I think the answer is at the moment we don't know, but it's not going away. So we might have to rethink how we do this kind of thing. And this applies not just within the aspect of our home lives, but in the aspect of the deliveries to site and how we make those more circular. There's one thing, a foot square cardboard box with a very small item in it delivered in a half empty van that goes away even less empty or even more empty is not great use of resources. But we need, the whole principle of backhauling, the kind of vehicles that we use, all of these apply to circularity. Okie doke. So I'm going to just breeze through the legislation really fast to kind of show where it's come from. So in the EPA, the Environmental Protection Act was the first time we moved from the principle of waste disposal, chucking stuff away, discarding, to waste management. So that was a step. Then in terms of the waste regulations, 2011 was the first time the waste hierarchy came into play. And the waste hierarchy I still see as a critical part in terms of circularity, because it's a great starting point, and it remains a legal obligation through these regulations to consider the waste hierarchy and what you do. So let's have it there. But what you do can be influenced by the powers that be. So the permitting regulations, when you start to think about circularity in terms of issues like soils and cut and fill and all those kind of areas, becomes very critical. You have to make sure that what you do is within the law and work with the regulators to make sure that's possible. So when you're planning your circular approach to whatever it is, be thinking through the art of the possible and how can you make things work as effectively as possible for you. I include the WE regulations, the waste electrical equipment regulations, because we generate so much waste electrical equipment. I'll come back to that in a second. Got an example. Producer responsibilities currently undergoing significant changes. Those will come in the next 2 or 3 years. We'll start to see. And these are placing the onus on the producer to be responsible for the recovery and recycling of more waste and packaging and take further responsibilities all round. Then we get into in Scotland there, you can see an example that all organisations in Scotland, whoever they are, must recycle plastic, metal, glass, paper and cards. So stuff is happening already at a specific level. Right, quick one, waste hierarchy, because I did say this was we're working at the basic level. I'd like you to answer the question, which is the most sustainable option under the waste hierarchy? So most in favour of prevention, which is correct. So if you prevent the waste from coming in the first place, reaching your site or entering your product or whatever else happens, you'll have less of a problem. Preparing for reuse is a good route as well. If you can't prevent it in the first place, can you make sure it is reusable? Okay, so let's move to the easiest question in the world, which is the least sustainable option. Yeah, hurrahs all round. I think we'll just move on from there, because the point is we don't have landfills and we don't want landfills. We have to make use of our resources. We have to make better use of our resources. I hope that was helpful, because really, if you can establish your thinking around the waste hierarchy, it will really help you with circularity. Thinking about prevention, designing out, thinking about this constant reusability. And it might be reusability of components or reusability of parts, not reusability of all. Thinking about recycling, what is not reusable, before you ever get to the, massively less circular options of recovery, probably for energy through incineration or pyrolysis, and disposal, which is the worst route you could possibly go down. Okay, policy. There's stacks of policy. The government has Our Waste, Our Resources strategy for England, a whole chapter devoted to sustainable production and the circular economy. So you will see that. It's not just all about England. For those of you who live in other more glorious parts of this British Isles of ours, you have the Welsh government, and they're focusing heavily into recycling. So there's significant work at national level going on. Same in Northern Ireland, same in Scotland. And one of our school partners, Zero Waste Scotland, has done some great work around the circular economy. I would recommend you very much to look at Zero Waste Scotland's website and look at the materials they have available, which certainly, if you're in a construction area as well, will really help you. And some new and future stuff that's coming through. So those of you who work in and around London or have clients in and around London, developments in London very much influenced now by the London Plan, which requires major projects to produce circular economy statements. And in fact, all projects in London are encouraged to produce circular economy statements. And these are exceptionally detailed. You have to demonstrate how the project will enable the building materials, components, products to be disassembled and reused end of life, and actually be thinking about that design, thinking about that at the design stage. Yeah, nice example there from Andrew. So talking about using and supporting charity shops and pre-cycle where you can. Notwithstanding, obviously, the business issues there. You're probably maybe talking about home life as well, but certainly using the voluntary sector in the business context is very useful. And that applies into the UK circular economy strategy, which you see mentioned there. More to read about that elsewhere, no time for it now. The UK Environment Bill, setting out a framework for increasing recycling, increasing legal powers on export of plastic waste. So we've got to develop our own system and process to be more circular. And there's been announcements only recently around extended producer responsibility for packaging. We're going to see a lot of activity around packaging and, attempts to reduce packaging and attempts to rethink the packaging issue. Here's one that came out only recently, and although it was for goods for kind of domestic use, I think it's interesting. This relates to, there you go, there's a figure, 1.5 million tons of electrical waste. We've all seen the fridge mountains. Anybody who's been to their local recycling centre will see the stuff that's getting chucked away. Maybe chucking stuff away yourselves because you can't repair it, or it's not possible for it to be repaired, or you're told it doesn't make financial sense to repair it and you might as well buy a new one at Curry's. Well, New rules that are coming into place should be in by June for electrical products, mostly white. This is around white goods, really, but thinking about tackling this issue of premature obsolescence, so building in a deliberate short lifespan. Yeah, good point, Gemma. Is built-in obsolescence an issue in construction materials or tools? Well, I suspect it might be. Certainly could be an issue in power tools, could be an issue in the materials themselves, yeah. And is there a way to find that we can make things more maintainable? So from summer 2021, legally obliged to make spare parts for products available for the first time. So a right to repair, and this is almost like a social movement that's pushing into a set of legislation. I think we'll see more of this, and it will probably start to impact on our business lives through the next short few years. I hope this is helpful. Financial case, I'll whip through this. We're still producing way too much waste, as that slide shows you, incredible amounts, and that doesn't seem to be reducing much. I updated this slide this afternoon for the new landfill tax, which shows it's nearly hit £100 a tonne. I remember when the landfill tax was introduced. I'm sadly old enough to have been around that long in this world, but the tax and the landfill tax that it's paid as a levy is not the true issue. So we're going to do another bit of an exercise here. When you bring a skip to site, let's say that skip costs £300 from your waste management organisation that's working with you. So that's the cost of the skip hire and to take it away. But Zero Waste Scotland have recently updated some of the work that was done years and years and years ago by a company called AMEC, who those of you been around long enough may remember, on true cost of waste. And Zero Waste Scotland reckon that there's around maybe another £2,100 worth of cost that really exists in that waste. So what things could go in? Yeah, design costs. Yeah, fixing things, moving stuff around, fuel, fly tipping costs. There's a scary one. Yeah, labour, people. Yeah, admin, operational carbon, the cost of carbon. Yeah, absolutely loads of stuff, really. So there's how Zero Waste Scotland did it, but there are others as well. Now, I haven't seen anything written in the right-hand side in that column that wouldn't represent a cost to somebody somewhere. So the cost of just managing waste in the first place, sites are restricted and you work to restricted programs in any kind of construction environment, let alone the program might not be restricted in a facilities management environment, but the space most certainly will be. So the whole issue of storage kicks in. Damaging raw materials. I see so much raw material that ends up in the skip that doesn't even make it to the final build. Design-driven waste, designing products that don't fit, so you got to chop a bit off and throw the same bit in the skip. Does that make sense? Designing products that then have to be thrown away because they can't be maintained. Again, this is more waste. It's all going into those skips. The wasted energy, the wasted labor. Lots and lots and lots of reasons why waste costs a lot more than you think. So it makes it worth doing something about it, and why the circular economy is a big deal. But then also that leads to the issues like business reputation and brand, because increasingly, I mentioned the investment community before, so there's a real desire for businesses to be seen to be cleaner and to be doing a better job. And a very real issue that we've focused on, I think, in the last year and in the run-up to Brexit, of supply chain security, being able to maintain the materials, the stock, the stuff that we need. All of those resources are becoming more valuable, and some of the resources that are not so valuable, we need to find ways to create a more circular approach so that we can either, we think about our plastic mounting, for instance, we need to develop a more circular approach in that area. So I'm going to just finish off really with a few examples of the circular economy in action. I hope this is kind of going in the right direction for you. But I mentioned the government waste strategy. So a couple of good examples from there is Bart's Health NHS Trust. They developed a process with Skanska for recycling renal dialysis bottles, plastic bottles, which would have been single use and would have been incinerated, most likely would have gone down the hazardous waste route and would have cost a lot of money to get rid of. So they found a way to actually recycle that material. So that's a nice example. And then Sony, everybody's probably, not everybody, but several people will have had to endure a few video games and this last year. So Sony Entertainment have introduced kind of for out of warranty PlayStations an affordable repair. So those they can be repaired. Nice example. A big policy area that's going to shift, and I do a lot of extra work on this, so you'll hear more about this outside of this call, is around plastic packaging tax. This is going to kick in April 2022. The tax will be £200 per tonne on any plastic packaging manufactured or imported into the UK that does not contain at least 30% recycled content. Now, just the act of administrating all that packaging and those figures is going to create again a significant on cost, but that is a hefty tax on what is already an expensive product, because when you buy a product, you pay for the packaging that it comes in. Okay, and you'll see at the bottom there that that's intended to discourage use of virgin material and to increase circularity in the UK economy. And that's, words from the horse's mouth from HMRC, who are administrating the tax. Tax is going to be on us very soon. Right, 2 more examples. Here's one that we've probably shown before. ProTech, who are a school member, have a product called Proplex, which is a temporary protection board, kind of temporary protection board you see around many kind of construction and FM sites. This is a circular product, so the product can be manufactured, it can be branded. Proplex, they have a way of actually backhauling the old product and running it straight back into supplies of the new product. So circular in itself, which is interesting, and it enables that vehicles to travel up and down those very busy motorways. They're actually got full of stuff both ways rather than full of stuff one way and empty of stuff going back the other. And also maintains the integrity of the material. Right, here's an example that came up from a workshop I did the other day, but a company we're very familiar with. This is Whitecroft Lighting. I'm just going to spend a few moments on this because this is a great example of the actually upcycling that they did. This was at Cheshire Police Headquarters. So the vision here was to reduce energy and stop as much product going to waste as possible and improve the light quality and also the controls with minimum disruption on this operational site. So they're working with a live customer in an operational site. And they didn't go with just one kind of product solution, but what Whitecroft did was the recessed ceiling luminaires, they came back to Whitecroft for upcycling and testing and then returned to site. So that was possible to actually improve the integrity of that piece of kit and get it back to site rather than bin it and buy a new one, or bin it and put a new one in. The downlights themselves were swapped new for old. Now, at the time, it was hard to convert to LED versus the energy benefit that would be achieved. But nonetheless, a significant carbon benefit across the whole in terms of the whole approach to this. The ceiling tiles were kept and new bezels were made to fit the new smaller LEDs in the existing apertures. So there were some new LEDs that went in as well. And the surface mount bulkheads were upcycled with retrofit gear trays on site. So no product at that point was returned to Whitecroft Lighting, and the gear trays were all made and tested at Whitecroft Lighting. And you can see the savings that, they're written in front of you. I don't need to read them out. They also, and really importantly, introduced wireless controls, and these enabled, these bring in place a massive advantage in terms of retrofit. So when they come back to retrofit, you're only working to the wireless control. You don't need to kind of start accessing the actual lines themselves. And also in terms of taking materials away from site, they used eco crates, which were reusable, and these removed all the cardboard and plastic from deliveries. So all of that cardboard and plastic, the miasma of that electrical gear can often come wrapped in, was avoided by that process. So I think that's a fabulous example. I wholly recommend that one to you. And Whitecroft actually launched a circular business model of their very own on the basis of that, called Whitecroft Vitality, where they look at circular design and manufacture, they look at the highest life through utility, and they look at regeneration and recovery. And what you have there is, we would talk more about this in kind of a more detailed event, but a real example of a circular business and something that you can take out that's different to sell to your customers. Fantastic job. So, we're at the end really now. I just wondered if you have examples of circularity in your own business or anything that went less well. Starch, we're seeing quite a bit of the cornstarch packaging now, aren't we? I found myself chewing one of those quavers that packaging came in to see if it was cornstarch the other day. Back to glass. We're back to fantastic. Back to glass milk bottles on site. Let's get back to brass tacks. Can you please advise a suitable construction product system route map for construction clients to follow when procuring to meet circular principles? Jim, what I would suggest there is take a look at either via the school or direct look at the Zero Waste Scotland circular economy guidance. It's really excellent around designing out waste and circular economy. I think that would help you no end. Yeah, working towards net zero carbon. Yeah, carbon is an effective and active part of a circular world. If you think about the whole lifespan of a product or a service, there's carbon used throughout. All routes lead to carbon, so it's important that we're constantly making those equations. We just need to get better at them, I think. Bamboo safety gloves. Yeah, the bamboo products are interesting, aren't they? They're really starting to work. We didn't set the bar very high on this one, but hopefully we can break that thinking that circular economy is purely about recycling. There's a lot more to it. I just think we've got so far to go with this because we've got loads more learning on the school side. UK Green Business Council's got a fantastic green economy actor and resource map where anything you ever wanted to know about the circular economy is available. Yeah, and that's us. I think we'll be doing a few more of these, and we're always interested in your ideas and examples and the kinds of things we should be talking about on top. Okie doke. I think we'll call that a draw then. For that, thank you very much, everybody.